Every year on Christmas Eve, my parents drug us. I found out why. Yeah, you read that right. Maybe you even read my post last year? I was pretty panicked when I wrote it, so it was short. But it was real. It's pretty simple for how crazy it all sounds. Every year on Christmas Eve, for as long as I can remember, my parents drug us with sleeping pills. Something about not being awake when Santa comes. We have a whole schedule the family keeps to. Dinner at 5, at 6 we put on our pajamas and watch that shitty movie It's a Wonderful Life. And yeah, the peas match. And then at 8:30 we all use our last bit of eggnog to wash down the pills. They're strong. My sister's out in probably 15 minutes. I take a little longer, but I'm always asleep by 9. Then we wake up the next morning, groggy but okay, and Mom gushes about everything Santa left under the tree, because we're good. It's all bullshit. My whole life I thought this was just what you did on Christmas. You have to be asleep when Santa comes, right? Otherwise his magic doesn't work. So we took magic pills to make sure we'd be asleep. As a kid it all made sense. You don't question shit like that when presents are on the line. Your parents are the law and you don't question them either. I only started to think that it was weird when I hit middle school. By that age, you don't believe in Santa anymore. Or you shouldn't. The last holdouts get mocked and the rest of us start talking about things like Xboxes and sneakers and how we're gonna get them. Me? I only had one question when the topic of Christmas came up. When did you guys stop taking the magic pills? That's a question that falls under the family business only clause, and I regretted it immediately. If any of them told their parents, I'll never know. In a bigger city with more oversight, someone would have, or should have, called Speeps. Out here, population 5,108, yeah, I checked, bumfuck nowhere left of the oil fields. No one gave a shit that some kid's family was drugging them for some peace on Christmas Eve. The day I asked that question, all my friends howled with laughter while I sat there beet red and trying to play it off as a joke. That was the day I knew it wasn't normal. Last year, I'd finally had enough. I got sick of the lies. Sick of the matching pajamas. Sick of playing pretend that we were having the perfect family Christmas. I wanted to know why my parents drug us. I had to know why. So when Mom handed me that little white pill, I hid it under my tongue and spat it in the toilet. Then I went to bed and pretended to be asleep. I listened until I heard Mom snoring to get up and look around. I wasn't surprised to see the tree stuffed with gifts already, Santa who, but that was it. I wasn't finding any secrets. Nothing unusual or weird, until I saw them. I was reading the credit card statement, so sue me, they drug us, when I saw movement outside. We always have a white Christmas. And by that time the street was dead quiet. So when I saw something rush by the window, it startled me. I just about opened the front door to go look when I saw them. Lots of them. Landing on the roofs one by one and crawling into the chimneys of every house. I don't even know how to properly describe them. Is that what PTSD does? Stops you from remembering things? Because I must have PTSD, I know I have it. I have to have it. I crouched by the couch, hiding behind the curtains and watching these giant red spidery things as they skittered across the rooftops. They'd reach a chimney and one by one hop in the air, tuck their legs into a line beneath them, and shoot down the chimney. They'd be gone for a few minutes, and then shoot back out, mostly with nothing, sometimes with random items or decorations. For one brief stupid second I thought that they were maybe some fucked up version of Santa's elves, until I heard the most god-awful sound, the sound that still haunts my every waking moment. Agonized screams of pure terror, wailing, crunching, grinding. The sound of someone's body being forced up the chimney. Human bodies don't fit in chimneys. Not like that. I watched in horror as the Smith's daughter Maggie came up the chimney, pulled by two of those freaks of nature. By the time they pulled her out, she'd stopped screaming. I don't think she was alive by then. I hope she wasn't. Her body wasn't right. It was like a tube of toothpaste that had popped. I sat there in shock, watching the Smith's roof turning pink before I felt the gravity of what I'd just seen bury me. Suddenly, I knew why my parents drugged us, and I needed to get to sleep, fast. I ran straight for the bathroom and poured out 3 of those little white sleeping pills, then dove into my bed. I pulled the covers over my head and started chewing. Have you ever tried to chew pills? They're not supposed to be chewed. They taste like shit. I just about threw up twice. It didn't help that I could hear those things getting closer. You know those movies about Santa and his reindeer? About the bells and the hooves? That's them. There's no reindeer. That horrible clicking comes from them. And I knew what they did to people who weren't sleeping. Waking up Christmas Day was awkward. Everyone else woke up for Christmas morning, and I woke up with my dad shaking me awake past noon. I could tell he wasn't impressed, but me? I was thrilled. The last time I woke up on Christmas that happy, I was like 5. After I stopped screaming, that is. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't being dragged up our chimney, but once I did, it was great. I threw myself on my dad like we were in a wrestling match. I ran downstairs, hugged my mother harder than I had in years, and then threw my sister over my shoulder. She was 8, still 100% a believer, and had been sour about waiting so long to start Christmas until I tickled her into submission. Happiness is contagious. And for the first time in a while, I was thrilled to see a Christmas with my family. It was awesome. Until it wasn't. We'd opened stockings and exchanged gifts, and were gorging ourselves on fresh cinnamon buns and eggs Benedict when I made the mistake of glancing outside. By that point, I'd sort of convinced myself that I'd just had a crazy dream. I'd snuck off to smoke pot with one of my friends early Christmas Eve, so I figured maybe it had mixed badly with the sleeping pill. But the moment I looked outside, my eyes were drawn to the Smith's house and that pink patch on top. Suddenly, I couldn't swallow, and I drank a whole glass of milk just trying to choke down my food. It hadn't been a dream. So where were the cops? Sure, I'd gotten up late, but a kid goes missing on Christmas Eve. You'd assume that the police would be crawling the neighborhood all day. You look a little green, bud, you okay? I'd been staring out the window, feeling the pit in my stomach grow heavier and heavier when my dad jolted me to reality. I looked at him and nodded, trying to take another bite for show. Hey, have you seen the Smiths? I asked suddenly, wondering if maybe they just hadn't wanted to spoil the mood. I watched my parents take a sharp but quick glance at each other before he shook his head and smiled. Not yet. I'll let you know if I see Maggie outside, though. He teased with a wink, grabbing my shoulder and giving it a squeeze as he left the table. Mom gave me a kind smile and poured me another glass of milk. I probably sat there for another hour before I finally gave up and went to help my sister set up her new dollhouse. I needed the distraction. When winter break ended, I was back at school, expecting to see an uproar that never came. Freshman year of high school, a kid had gotten into a car accident, and the entire student body held a vigil for him. There was a memorial in the auditorium, meetings after school to light candles, and the school even brought in a couple therapists. Nobody said or did anything like that for Maggie. It was like everybody just kind of forgot that she existed, and it was strange. Hell, even the local newspaper seemed to skip it, and they had absolutely nothing to report on most days. It took until mid-January before I spotted a tiny obituary tucked in the corner of a back page. I saved it, stuffing it in a notebook at home for safekeeping. It almost felt like if I didn't remember she died, no one would. Honestly, the whole incident took a toll. March came and went, and so did my birthday. I was 17 now, supposed to be focusing on planning for college, but all I could think about was Christmas. I could barely sleep. Every night I'd go to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, jumping at every little snap or crack. Every morning I'd wake up with darker bags under my eyes than the day before. I couldn't focus in school. My grades dropped. My parents started asking about drugs. By the end of October, I'd had no less than 8 visits with the student counselor, who kept gently asking me if things were okay at home. What could I say? No, Mez. Andrews, I saw Christmas spiders pull a girl out of a chimney, and it makes it hard to do math. Right. I couldn't tell anyone. How do you talk about shit like this? I sounded crazy in middle school when I tried to ask my friends about being drugged on Christmas Eve. I'd definitely get locked up if I talked about giant red spiders taking people in the night. But I was losing my mind. We'd had Thanksgiving. Halloween was coming, and the colder it got, the more anxious I got. The stores were already running clearance on costumes and jack-o'-lanterns to make room for ornaments. The first signs of Christmas were already seeping in, and I was absolutely, without a doubt, terrified for my life. That's when my friends called me to hang out. It might sound stupid, but my friends and I have a code we use when things are bad and we need to talk. We definitely drifted apart in high school. None of us really hung out that much together anymore. But none of us had ever backed out when someone said they needed to smoke. I was exhausted, but I figured the worst I'd get was some weed out of it. Besides, when the bat signal goes up, you gotta answer it. Roll it right or don't roll it at all, man, Ella complained, watching Greg scowl while trying to ready a joint. We were huddled in the woods behind the school, freezing our asses off in the early cold snap. Max groaned and snatched everything away from him, making quick work of it, and then lighting up. Christ, finally. Okay, he breathed out smoke with a sigh before passing the joint to the left. So, it's been one hell of a year, right? Max was always the type for speeches. I sat there shivering and waiting for my share, staring at the ground. We haven't had much time to hang out. And even though I've been busy, you guys are still my best friends. Even one day when I go off to Hollywood and become famous, I will always love all of you. There were groans all around and Max waved us off, coughing a little and laughing. So like that love is why I called us together. I think we all know why we're here. Hayden, he paused as Ella finally passed me the joint. This is like an intervention. I didn't even get to smoke before I choked and coughed from surprise. We're really worried about you, Ella added gently, putting a hand on my arm. Don't be, I mumbled, taking a drag. I glanced back at the school. I'd been fired from my job, so my car wasn't insured. I'd gotten a ride there with Max. If I wanted to leave, I'd have to walk home, and it was too cold for that. Come on, talk to us, bro. You've just disappeared. We never see you. We're worried. Don't be. People think you're gonna shoot up the school. God, I thought we agreed not to tell him that, Ella squeaked, covering her face as Greg just shrugged. Someone has to. You guys suck, I stood up to leave. I was already stressed and running on no sleep. Now I was fucking embarrassed too. People thought I was going to shoot up the school? Did my friends think that? I didn't even like killing bugs. Stop. Just stop. Max grabbed my arm and pulled me back down, passing me the joint. Just relax. Come on, we're your friends. When Ella's parents divorced, what did we do? We smoked and talked. Greg's dog died, we smoked and talked. You're not the Hayden we know, so talk to us. I sat on the stump, fidgeting and staring at the ground until I was high enough to be brave enough to try and tell them the truth. What did I have to lose? They thought I was crazy anyways. You guys remember in middle school, when I talked about magic pills? The Santa pills, she asked slowly, squinting at me. I mean, yeah, I guess. What about it? They weren't magic pills, they were sleeping pills. Ever since I can remember, my parents have drugged me and my sister on Christmas Eve. I thought it was normal. They told me they were magic pills to make sure we were all asleep so that Santa... I stopped and groaned, rubbing my face and trying not to wuss out. So that Santa would come. Because he doesn't come when you're awake. I saw Greg clamp a hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Ella shot him a dirty look and elbowed him hard, then smiled at me. Fuck, this is stupid. Never mind. No, it's not. Keep going. Come on, we want to hear. I took a deep breath in and closed my eyes. I hated closing my eyes. If I closed my eyes and thought about it, I could see it all happening again. I could hear Maggie's screams again. Last year, I didn't take mine. I wanted to see what happens, what they're hiding. And I saw these things. They climb all over the houses, they go down people's chimneys, and they take people who aren't sleeping. You guys remember Maggie? That's how she died. I saw them take her. I heard her screams. It's all I can think about. I didn't realize it, but by the end of the story I was crying. A dam had broken somewhere inside me. I scrubbed my tears away with my sleeve. I could see Greg had stopped laughing, but I couldn't look at any of their faces. I was too embarrassed. I sounded nuts. All I could do was examine the bucket we'd flipped over to use as a table. It was old, from Rona, beat up. It was cracked. It was. They never found her body, Max said with a strained voice. I know Maggie's brother. Like, not well, but we talked. He said they were all sleeping. No one heard anything. They never found the body. They moved in the summer. What? How'd I miss that? I spent way more time than I should have staring at their house. I should have noticed. Yeah, like in August. He DM'd me and said they were moving, and that was it. We all sat there in shocked silence for a little bit until Ella piped up. So how do you know your parents drug you? She asked with a frown. Like those magic pills could be candy or something. And it's just the placebo effect thing happening to you. I saw the prescription bottle. Besides, you feel weird the next day. Feel weird how? fuzzy. We all turned to Greg. He'd largely been silent, but now he looked nervous, passing the joint without taking a puff. We were all done actually, silently but unanimously voting to put it out. You wake up groggy. You know when you get woken up in the middle of the night? Like that, only it's morning. And you just sleep through the night. I've never woken up on Christmas Eve. Ever the more I talked, the more both he and Ella looked alarmed. Do your parents drug you too? No, Ella barked, almost sounding offended. No, I mean, I don't think so. Grandma makes us this tea though every Christmas Eve. It's supposed to calm us down. So we sleep. Well, as she described it, she scrunched her face up and tugged on her ponytail. Fuck. They're drugging us too. Greg looked downright sick. He didn't say it, but from the look on his face, he'd been sleeping way too well on Christmas Eve too. I take Ambien Sue. They don't really need to, Max said with a shrug. By now, Ella was pacing. Okay, so they're drugging us. But why? I mean, listen, I believe you saw what you saw, but couldn't it have been a hallucination? Why isn't this widespread news? You mean news like Maggie disappearing? I asked. I live right across the street, and the cops didn't even show up. No one cared that Maggie died. No one talked about it. No wonder they moved. We all just pretended like she didn't exist. The shamed silence that followed stretched on until Greg's phone buzzed and he announced that he had to go to work. Ella did too. They both worked at the same fast food place. They gave us a half-hearted goodbye. I was exhausted, completely emotionally drained after spilling my guts, and Max offered to drive me home soon after the others left. It was a silent ride. He seemed deep in thought, and I was so tired I didn't even want to try and talk. It didn't matter. I'd told them. They could think I was crazy all they wanted. I found money on the counter for pizza at home and put in a Domino's order before finding something to watch. The entire time I sat there, all I could think about was Maggie and how she'd just disappeared from our little town the moment she was snatched. It was like those things had just wiped her off the map and everyone let it happen. I remembered the obituary halfway through dinner and ran upstairs to dig out the notebook I'd put it in. It wasn't long, that's for sure. Her family had barely put in any description in at all. Like all obituaries, they had put down the date of her death, and that gave me a sudden idea. I started searching. Our town was small and rural, but we did have a newspaper, and it had managed to get a grant a few years ago to make a website and start digitizing everything. That meant that they had decades worth of obituaries to look through. I started to search for any deaths around Christmas. Deaths in December weren't unusual, even in a small town. Between icy roads causing grandma to fall or depression taking lives, death was expected at Christmas. But when I started to dig through my results, I noticed a serious difference between the Nana eats shit deaths and the ones that happened right on Christmas itself. They were all short, with few details, and all were published weeks after the event. There were never any funerals or memorial services to be had, no options to send flowers somewhere. It seemed like every year at least one person died under strange circumstances at Christmas and just became invisible. I made a list of the last few deaths and started searching for their families. Just like the Smiths, most of the families had moved away after the death. I scoured social media pages for more clues. No one that had left seemed to keep ties with anyone in our little town. In fact, many of the families hadn't been in the town long before the death had happened. If I thought about the Smiths, they had only moved here a few months before last Christmas. It wasn't uncommon for families to move here for the oil opportunities, make some money, and then leave when they realized there wasn't much to do. It wouldn't have looked unusual if you didn't know that someone had died. I sat back, shoveling in the last couple slices of cold pizza. Why hadn't I looked this up before? I'd spent most of 2022 trying to forget what I'd seen but being too scared to let it go. All I could think of was Christmas, and what I knew would happen when I was asleep. I'd nearly failed out of school. I'd lost my job, okay, it was a shitty one, but still. I was this close to losing any opportunities for a good college. But worse than that, I was probably the only person who had seen what comes on Christmas Eve and lived to talk about it. That gave me a responsibility, right? I knew what they looked like and what they did. And now, I knew that this had been going on for years. My parents had been drugging me since I was born, so they must have known about it. They grew up here. They had to know. The Smiths had only been in town for a few months. Maybe nobody warned them. Maybe they just went to bed like normal, never knowing the risks. Shit, why had no one told them? I pulled out my phone, texting Max. I needed him to hook me up with Maggie's brother. I needed to know what happened after she died. Then I messaged everyone on Facebook in one big group chat. There were some families that had lived here for generations and had still had people die. I had the perfect idea on how to contact them. We were going trick-or-treating this year. Trying to talk to Maggie's brother had been a waste of time. I wasn't totally shocked, but I was disappointed. I'd thought he was actually going to talk to me at first. It had been going fine, even after mentioning how crazy it was that no one talked about his sister's death, when suddenly he stopped replying and blocked me. Blocked me on Insta, on Facebook, and when I tried calling his cell, I got that annoying number not in service robot voice. After that happened, I filled my friends in on why we were going trick-or-treating. It wasn't exactly a popular request, but everyone seemed to agree to it out of pure loyalty. Normally at 17, you went to a party and got drunk, mostly because people didn't really love handing out candy to teenagers. This year we'd hit the streets. Someone's gonna call the cops on us. My dad will kill me if he finds out about this. Greg looked paranoid like usual. I couldn't blame him. His parents were super religious and thought costumes were. Honestly, I don't know. They just thought it was wrong. We'd had to keep a cape and plastic fangs for him at Max's house where we all got ready. We each opted for something quick and easy. Greg was a vampire. Ella was a witch. Max put on a cowboy hat and I dressed like a ghost. They weren't good costumes, but they were costumes. How'd you convince your parents to let you come out tonight anyways? He held up a plastic bag filled with religious pamphlets. I said I was called to spread the word. So what's the plan? We hit a few houses and try and get candy so we look legit, and then we go to the houses on my list. I answered, pulling out a list and a map where I'd marked everyone down. And you're just going to ask them about their murdered family member? What if there's kids? I plan on showing them this. I pulled out a piece of lined paper with a drawing of one of the creatures. They all stared at it. Don't spiders have like 8 legs? There's only 4. I rolled my eyes and put it back in my bag. I said, spider, why? They're not actual spiders. Okay, Picasso. Ella laughed as we headed off into the night. We got turned away from a few houses, but people were surprisingly generous most of the time. We got a couple glad to see teenagers doing something wholesome comments, and it didn't take us long to get into it. It was nice. Trick-or-treating with my friends brought back a lot of memories and good feelings. Every time we stopped to compare notes on our haul, it felt like we were kids again. It gave me just a glimmer of hope before we hit the first Target house. We waited on the street for the big group of kids to get their candy and hustle on before stepping up to the plate and ringing the bell. Trick-or-treat. The door swung open, and we all smiled like fools. The woman inside, a lady that looked to be in her 50s, gave us a confused smile back and grabbed her candy bowl. I held up my art the moment the peanut butter cups hit the pillowcase. Do you recognize this? I asked. She paused, looked over my shitty drawing, and then shook her head. No, I don't. But it's very nice? You kids have a good Halloween. I didn't even have time to react. The next group of kids were already pushing us out, and so we walked back to the street. Okay, that didn't work, I sighed, opening up a snack-sized bag of chips. Do we believe her? Ella asked, doing the same. We all started walking and eating, the salt cutting the handfuls of candy we'd already stuffed ourselves with. Yeah. I don't think she's seen them. She didn't even blink. So maybe you gotta go harder next time. If no one's seen those things, it won't mean a thing to them. Ask them about the deaths. So I did. The next house was polite as could be, considering the question. The house after slammed the door in our faces. The house after that actually took their candy back before rattling the door on its hinges. It was going honestly pretty terrible. No pumpkins. Porch light is off. Bummer. It was getting late, and we'd agreed to go to Max's house for curfew to watch movies. I'd only marked off a plan for 10 houses, and we'd reached our limit. The last house was a dead end. Anyone have a pen? I asked suddenly, a last-ditch idea coming to mind. Greg dug through his pamphlet bag and gave me one, and I crouched on the sidewalk to write a quick note on the back of the drawing. I left my phone number and an explanation and slipped it through the rusty old mail slot on the door. It was old, loud, and nearly bit my fingers off trying to get the paper through. Once I saw it disappear, we started to leave. We got nearly a house away before a hoarse yell stopped us. Looking back, a woman that had to be at least in her 80s was waving at us from the place we'd just been. "Get over here," she squawked, the paper clutched in her hand. We all froze, sharing nervous glances. I guess some part of me didn't really believe anyone would recognize it. If no one recognized it, then the issue would be moot. I could say I'd done what I could and just start therapy to deal with what I saw. Instead, we all made our way back, meeting the woman on her stoop. "Get inside, it's cold out," she ordered, stepping aside and motioning us through. "Shoes off, sit down." What looked like no lights on from the outside was actually the thickest blackout curtains I'd ever seen. Every window we could see was completely covered and barred. When she shut the door, she locked it and braced it with a chair. Not that I think it really mattered. The thing looked like an industrial security door from the inside. What really stood out to me, though, and what I couldn't stop staring at, was her fireplace. It just didn't really exist anymore. She'd filled the bottom with cement, gated it, and wrapped the gate with barbed wire. "So, you've been awake on Christmas Eve, it seems. Must have been quite the fright." "When?" I was in shock. She sat comfortably on a recliner just across from us, a shotgun stuffed in what looked like a magazine holder. "Well, last year," I stuttered out. She just nodded, looking over the drawing carefully. I had to know why. "They give us pills." "Pills? Goodness. That's ripe for trouble. Back in my day, you got an infusion, or Dad let you sneak some alcohol. Anything to hide it. I guess your parents bought into that never lie to your kids crap." The magazine started shilling. She clucked her tongue, tucking the piece of paper into her pocket. "Look where it got them. Do they know?" I shook my head quickly. "I didn't think they knew." Each Hempeef. "Well, you're lucky. There's not a lot of lucky ones that see the creatures and live to talk about it. Most anyone who does gets their death." "Up the chimney," I practically whispered, and her face softened. "Poor kid. You must live near that girl that died. There was just one last year, I believe." "I'm sorry, dear. That's just something no one should ever see." Beside me, Greg, Max, and Ella had all sunken into themselves. Ella looked like she might throw up at any second. "So it's real?" she asked, pulling off her fake nose. "They're real." The woman gave a solemn nod. She gave us a thin-lipped smile before getting up, returning moments later with a box of papers. "You probably already know this, but my name is Rosalie Walsh. Rosie for short. My family's lived here for generations now. My sister, God rest her soul, was the most recent member of my family to die in that awful way. She'd been on a new medication, didn't realize it was basically amphetamines. By time she realized she wasn't getting to sleep there, just wasn't anything she could do about it. Told me as much in the letter she left. There's Anne, empty grave in her name at the cemetery. There's a lot of empty graves. Empty urns. Lots of families in this town never get to bury their loved ones." She dug through the box and pulled out an album of family photos. There were several photos with red dots next to them, and I realized that they were people that had been taken. "So you never find the bodies?" "No, and having seen it happen myself, I guess it's as much a blessing as a curse." "Where do the bodies go?" asked Max, twisting and turning the book, flipping pages and frowning at the growing list of red dots. "Don't know. Lots of rumor and conjecture on that one. Some folks say they're eaten." "Bathrooms down the hall," and to the left kid she pointed at Greg, who was green by then, and he gratefully ran off through the house. Like I said, some folks think they get eaten. Other folks think they're taken somewhere. Some of the more airy-fairy fools think that they're taken to some sort of fantasy land. The real Santa's workshop, that they're all up there living in bliss. I think if they'd seen what a person looks like after going up a chimney, there wouldn't be any magical thinking left. "So what are they?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Look through here," she ordered, passing me the box and kicking the recline function into gear. I'm no expert. Not a history major or archaeology anything. I went to school for accounting. But I was your age when I took an interest in it. Woke up at just the wrong time. Guess my father didn't put enough whiskey in my drink that night. Instead of waking up Christmas morning, I woke up close to midnight. Heard the hooves. Could have sworn I heard the bells. The sound of the ornaments clinking on the tree. Doesn't matter how old you are, If you think you hear Santa on Christmas Eve, you get up to look. So I did. Crept out real slow, real quiet. I got just to the edge of the living room when I saw them. Those nasty things. Disgusting creatures. They had my little brother, and they. She paused, taking in a sharp breath and resting her fingers on her face, a little shake to her voice. God, 60 years, and it still gets me. They put him up the chimney. A couple go up the top, hold onto the head. The other shoves from the bottom. He was awake. He screamed. Lord, he screamed finally. She just waved her hand a little, as if trying to wave away the memory, her eyes wet. Couldn't do nothing. I was too scared. I went back to bed. Hid under the covers. But it was fine. Once they get awaker, they leave. They got what they came for. I didn't sleep for years. Still don't, not really. While she talked, Ella and I rifled through the box. There were dates, times. Letters written from strangers describing what they'd seen. There were drawings too, much better than mine, but all displaying something similar. The collection went back through the years. What's this, I asked, holding up a photo of a roof. It looked like someone made a mistake taking the photo. All you saw was a snowy roof and these strange white smears. That's how they show up on camera. The only reason we know what they look like is eyewitness accounts. Even video doesn't capture them. They end up looking like glitter. She heaved a big sigh. Eyes on the ceiling, face looking suddenly more gaunt and drawn than when we'd first seen her. They always come in threes. Never seen a house without three. They always come down the chimney. They take the first waker they come across, one per house. Only one per house. Then they leave, on to the next, and so on, until every house has been hit. Can't we just, close up the chimneys, Max asked, pointing to the cement job she'd done on hers. Won't that just, solve it all? What about apartments? You ever seen an apartment in this town, kid? She asked, eyeing him carefully. We all paused, taking a moment to think. There's an ordinance here. This town has strict rules about what can be built. No apartments. Most you'll see is a duplex, all with fireplaces. She was right. There wasn't an apartment anywhere within the boundaries of the town. Even double-story houses were weird. If someone built something other than the usual flat single-story home, you could guarantee the neighbors would gossip. It was too flashy. Every family handles it differently. My parents told us after my brother went missing. Felt it wasn't fair we didn't know after that. Some folks don't tell their kids until it's time for them to move out. Figure they want to preserve what innocence they have. Not everyone handles it well when they find out. My eldest son John had a fire in his belly and didn't believe us. Said we just wanted to keep him home. That was a hard Christmas. My husband and I had the kids help clean the roof after. Did it hurt them? Sure did. But they believed after that. They're all still alive. At some point Greg had returned, and then left again at mention of cleaning the roof. The rest of us sat there in numb silence as Rosie talked. Finally, the memories seemed to take their toll on her. Time's up, kids. Halloween is over, she announced, straightening up and taking the box back. The best I can suggest is that you take those pills. Take enough. Sleep through. Try and pretend you don't know what you know. She cleared her throat and held out her hand. Reese's. We all stood there like deer in headlights before someone snapped out of it and dropped a couple candies in her hand. Honestly, it seemed fair. We all paid our toll, and she walked us to the door. Here, one last treat. I don't know what they are, but I know they aren't anything holy. She dropped a thick notebook in my pillowcase and patted me on the shoulder, then gently shoved us out the door and slammed it behind us. We barely made curfew that night. Not that it mattered. Max's parents were pretty lax and his eldest sister was still out partying by the time we got to his house. Someone voted to order a pizza. Someone else voted to put a movie on. We ended up settling on watching The Little Mermaid. Laugh all you want, but it was the only thing we could agree on. Not one of us wanted to watch anything scary after hearing what Rosie had to say. After that, we didn't talk for a couple weeks. It was like we all silently but mutually agreed that we couldn't be around each other after we'd learned the truth about Christmas in our little town. I couldn't even open the book that Rosie gave me. I hid it under my bed, gave my candy to Sarah, and stopped all my research. I didn't want to even think about it. And for the first time since Christmas last year, I managed to sleep until a couple weeks ago. That was when Ella called me up. Someone new had moved into town at the start of December. a family with 3 kids. They live a couple doors down from her, and she'd been watching them like a hawk. She wanted to see what the neighbors would do. Normally, the welcoming committee came by with some sort of shitty gift basket and cheap plastic key to the city, but there was no one. Not even the nosy old lady that lived across the street dropped by. "I think they're sacrificing them," she'd said once we had all gotten together on those ice-cold stumps behind the school for a smoke. "That's why the cops don't come. That's why the newspapers don't run any stories. That's why no one fucking talks about our town after they leave. If everyone that's lived here all their lives knows you have to stay asleep, there's no one to take. So they need new people to come. They need people for the spiders to take. So we've been prepping, researching, making plans. Maybe we're crazy, but something about watching the entire town just hang these people out to dry, knowing what's going to come, makes us all sick. We're all graduating soon, and we all plan on leaving. But we're not letting this happen again this year without a fight. Someone has to do something. There has to be some revenge for people like Rosie, for Maggie. It's Christmas Eve. Everything is in place and now we're just waiting. Everyone's at home. My parents are making cookies. Ella's helping her family make a gingerbread house. We're all doing something, just waiting for everyone to go to sleep. Wish us luck.